Today I'm sharing my January reading wrap-up. Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to give you just a wrap up of all the books I read in January. Now, I've talked about most of these because I do try to post each week weekly reading updates, but there were a couple that I haven't talked about, and I was just going to talk about the different goals that I had and whether or not I reached those goals. So here we go. I'm going to do a quick run through of all the books that I read in January up to last week. So I read Death at Wentwater Court by Carola Dunn. That was a mystery. It was a fun, cozy mystery, and it was published in 1994. I read Snow Treasure by Marie McSwiggan, and that was published in 1942. That was a middle grade, and it was based on a true story. Winter and Rough Weather by D.E. Stevenson. That was published in 1950. Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. It was published in 1934. Again, that's a mystery. Most of you know that one as well. Winter is Not Forever by Jeanette Oke. That is part of a series. It is Christian fiction. It is historical fiction. And it is part of a series called Seasons of the Heart. That particular book was published in 1988. I'm looking at my journal, if you're wondering what I'm looking at, because I try to write all these things down as I go. The next one was a buddy read. I buddy read this book with Nikki from Red Dot Reads and Krista from Books and Jams, and that was a nonfiction called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It was written by Rebecca Skloot, and that was published in 2010. I read Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. This was the only young adult book, or labeled young adult, that I read, and it was historical fiction. I actually posted an entire video for a review for this particular book. If you're interested, I'll try to put that in the cards in case you want to watch that one. And that was published in 2011. Then I read a romance. I know I don't normally read romances, but this was a romance, and it was interesting. It was called Winter Wedding by Betty Niels, and that was published, and you can tell that it was published in 1979. And then I read another Lemony Snicket in the series of Unfortunate Events. This was The Carnivorous Carnival, and it was published in 2002. Again, that is a middle grade series. I read Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. That was magical realism, and that was published in 2018. And then I read Ruby Holler by Sharon Creech. It is a middle grade. It was published in 2002. And then I read Fog Magic by Julia Sawyer. That was published in 1943. It is middle grade, and it is another magical realism. I also read another mystery, middle grade mystery. This was what I called a treasure find. It was published in 1957 and it's written by Phyllis Whitney, and it was called The Mystery of the Green Cat. That was a fun read too. Now, for the past week, the last week in January, I read two more books that I wanted to mention. One I don't have a physical copy of because I listened to the audio. I actually couldn't find a physical copy, but I've wanted to read this for quite some time. I've heard great things about it, and it was called The All-of-a-Kind Family by Sydney Taylor, and this was written, it was published in 1951. Again, it's middle grade. I loved this story. If you've not read All of a Kind Family and you like heartwarming, cozy family type stories and you like to read middle grade, you'll probably love this one. It's about this Jewish family during the late 1940s. It was a lot of fun. It reminded me of the Vanderbeekers. I've only read 3 of those, but the same kind of dynamic with it is set in the city, and the family is just, they love one another and encourage one another through all their struggles and things that happen. It's just a fun, heartwarming middle grade. So if you like those kind of stories, I highly recommend All of a Kind family. I like that it was a Jewish family because that was a different perspective. There are scenes within the story of their Jewish holidays. That was a lot of fun too, because I don't know that much about all the holidays that they celebrate, so I enjoyed that as well. So I do recommend All of a Kind family, and I gave it 5 stars. So finally, the last book was The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. I buddy read this with Miriam, and I'll leave a link to her channel below. I think we had the same kind of feelings about this book. We both went in super interested in the story, but it kind of it was slow, and so it kind of just stayed there for most of the book. This is a dual timeline. There is a modern day, and the main character is a writer, so she's writing the historical fiction story that you learn in this book. It's from the 1700s. The historical part's the 1700s with the Jacobites. I don't know that much about that time period, but I am interested in it. I know enough to be interested in that time period. So I was interested in it from the beginning. I love Susanna Kearsley's writing style. I did love that. The problem I had was it just was too slow. I hear people complain about Kate Morton being slow, but I love Kate Morton's pace, and this is slow. So if you aren't a fan of Kate Morton's style and how slow she starts, because a lot of times I don't think it's really slow as much as Kate Morton kind of sets you up and takes her time setting up the story. This to me was slow. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. But in the story, again, there's 2 timelines, and both of them, in the beginning I was really interested in both stories, but by midway nothing had really happened, and I felt like the main characters, the lead female characters in both of these timelines, were not doing anything. Things were happening around them and to them, but it was like they were just observing. It really wasn't progressing, and I was sad to say I was glad when it was over. I gave this 3 stars because halfway through is when I started kind of fizzling out. But I did, again, like the writing style, and I did read the whole thing because I did want to know what happened in the end. But by the end, when I did find out what happened, I just wasn't into it anymore. So this is my first Susanna Kearsley, but again, I did like the writing style. I have a couple more on my shelf, so I'm not giving up. I know a lot of people have told me that I would love Susanna Kearsley's writing, and again, I did like the premise and the style of the writing, so it could have been just this particular story and these characters. So I'm not giving up. I will try another one. If you have read a Susanna Kearsley that's not this one that you have enjoyed, let me know in the comments. So those are the books that I read this past week to finish up January. I really enjoyed the books that I read. Even with that one, 3 stars and up. I didn't have any 2 stars. I finished everything. I didn't have any DNFs. So I was pleased with my reading for January. One of my goals for January was to read as many winter-related books on my shelf that I could get to. And I did that because when I looked back over my reading journal, I had read 9 books that were winter related. So I was really excited about that. Before I forget, if you have a favorite winter read that I have not mentioned, add that to the comments so that I could read that one too. And I'll put that on my next January read, because I find that after Christmas, I'm ready for snowy, wintry reads. So let me know in the comments if you have a favorite winter book to read. So then when I look back over my January reading, I tried to decide on what was my best book, my favorite read for January, and I'm surprised to say that Fog Magic by Julia Sawyer, I checked this out from the library, was my favorite read of the month. I enjoyed a lot of the books I read, but this one really stands out for me. It's funny because I was reading that, which is magical realism, alongside an adult magical realism, Once Upon a River, and I really thought that Once Upon a River was going to be my favorite book and a favorite book of the year. Unfortunately, by the end, there were some things at the end that left me disappointed. Now, I did love reading it, and it was a page turner for sure. as I was reading it, it was what in the world's going on in this book? But by the end, there were some questions left unanswered, so I only gave that one 4 stars, and then Fog Magic was a 5-star read. So that's why it bumped up to my favorite read for January. I highly recommend both of those books though. So those are the books that I read in January. Again, I feel like it was a great reading month for me. This week in February, I'm reading for the Little House Readathon. I've already started reading some of the Little House on the Prairie books. I plan on reading all of the books in the Little House series for this readathon. And I've already read several of those, as well as a couple of nonfiction that are related to Laura Ingalls Wilder that have been really interesting. So I'll talk to you about those in my first reading update for February next week. So what have you been reading? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.